Hello, my friends. Welcome to another episode of 30 Albums for 30 Years, 1964 through 1994. I am your host, Jay Sweet, recording this from my music studio, so you might hear some piano being played in the background. That's a student getting a lesson. But anyway, I do want to mention that since we've last talked, it's been a little while. The show is still doing great, and we've added more listeners in more countries. We are now being heard in 24 different countries, including Mexico, Puerto Rico, Kenya, France, and Albania. So I want to welcome all of my international listeners. It's so good to have you with us. Today I will be sharing with you my interview with saxophone master Vincent Herring. Vincent Herring first toured the U.S. and Europe with Lionel Hampton's band. He was heavily influenced early on by Julian Cannonball Adderley's playing, and his talents came to the attention of Nat Adderley, Cannonball's brother. So he joined the Trumpeters band and toured and recorded with Nat Adderley for about 9 years. And then after Nat's death, he worked with drummer Louis Hayes to form the Cannonball Adderley Legacy Band. He also worked with piano master Cedar Walton for more than 2 decades. Additionally, he has appeared on stage and or on recordings with Freddie Hubbard and Dizzy Gillespie, Art Blakey, Wynton Marsalis, Horace Silver, Jack DeJohnette, Larry Coryell, Kenny Barron, Nancy Wilson. There's just so many to name. Over 250 recordings as a sideman and over 20 titles as a leader. He's also a noted educator who teaches at Manhattan School of Music and William Patterson. Now, Herring will be appearing with his band Something Else, which he describes to me as sort of a soul jazz review at Smoke Jazz Club in Manhattan from June 15th through June 18th. We talk about that. And in his group is a fantastic ensemble, including Jeremy Pelt on trumpet, James Carter on tenor sax, Paul Bolenbach on guitar, Dave Kukowski on piano, Essiet on bass, and Jeff Tain-Watts on drums. All monster players. You don't want to miss this if you are in the area. Now, Vincent Herring suffered terribly with COVID in around 2001, I think, and he thought the effects were going to end his career. We're so glad that it didn't, because he has a lot more music in him, and it's great to see him out there doing what he does best, which is playing and teaching. So we jump right into it. Here it is, my interview with Vincent Herring. I hope you enjoy.
It's interesting that one of the things that I do is try to expose students to things that they may have not heard. You know, it's funny. I like to consider myself young, and in some perspectives I am. But you live through a lot of things, and you live through some changes in the music. And these kids, they grow up, you know, GPS is normal, cell phones is normal. It's a different world for them. And so, you know, it's hard for them to imagine a world that's different. So, you know, I grew up at a time where one of my earliest musical influences was maybe Freddie Hubbard. And the thing that I loved about Freddie Hubbard is he would play music most of the time that jazz snobs loved it, no question about that. They loved it for many reasons: the overall feeling, the technical aspects of the music. And a non-musician, layman, still enjoyed it also. Why? Because of the feeling of the music and what it brought overall. And what I'm finding now is that, you know, like the proficiency of my students is amazing. I mean, like when I was growing up, getting ready to go to college, maybe out of 100 students, I would be that one special student. Right. But now, out of 100 students, you have 20, maybe 25 that are on that level, or if not higher. And then the next tier down is very large, and so the proficiency level of the musicians right now today is much higher, I think, than it's ever been. I'm pretty sure that that's not a stretch of the imagination. Yeah. And, you know, part of it, I try to figure out, why is that? You know, why is it that now so many people are highly proficient, but the music that they're producing, not necessarily do I like it, even though I respect it. And, part of it is that the scene is in a different place. Mm-hmm. When I grew up, the things that I listened to, the things that were important, the value system of the music was a little bit different. And what I realized is that now today, the scene is not where it used to be. Before, the scene was in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, in the clubs and developing in those venues. Then later came the loft scenes in New York and still, a lot of gigs and stuff. And then in the 80s, it was interesting, that started to change, but I grew up having a chance to play with all of these guys. I work with Dizzy Gillespie, right. Nat Adderley, Horace Silver, Art Blakey, Cedar Walton, a long list of guys, because they were all around. Yeah. And we had a common value system. I was trying to play music that I enjoyed and that I wanted to be a part of. Mm-hmm. And so my value system was according to what I listened to at the time. So now the scene has shifted away from, great masters hearing you, making you a part of the band or in their circle, and then you have your shot. That whole thing is gone. Now the scene is in school. and a byproduct of that is that the value systems is so different. Like what the kids are super impressed by, I hear and I'm like, really?
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I don't want to be that old guy who's like, in my day, it's right. Not, I don't want to be that person. And intellectually, I say to myself, I'm going to be as open-minded as possible, and I try to evaluate those things not as a jazz snob. I try to evaluate it just as a person taking it in its entirety and trying to enjoy it. And I'm finding that that's not happening, and so just witnessing and being a part of those things, I decided to create a band that's a byproduct of what I grew up with, what I enjoy, what I like. And as I look and listen and continue to evaluate, I realize that it's kind of, the best description I can give, it's kind of a soul jazz review. And what I mean by that is, you remember how you probably did some gigs like this, like, Motown guys would travel to like Monmouth, New Jersey, and it'd be like 5 or 6 of them, the Temptations, this group, that group, and then you guys would be like a band that backed them up, and you played all the stuff, and they would do a review. They would run through all of their hit tunes, and it would be like a R&B review, right? Yeah. So the original structure of this was meant to be a soul jazz review, not completely, because we play some things that are definitely not that. Right. But for the most part, I realized that when I look at the selection of music that I chose, that's pretty accurate as to what it is, and it's just songs from composers that I grew up with. I mentioned Freddie Hubbard, Stanley Turrentine, George Benson, and a whole host of others. And it's music that feels good, feels great. All the musicians in the band are in tune with it. It's not a stretch, because they all grew up with it also, because we're all kind of grouped in that same age bracket. And it ends up being refreshing, because it's just it's a sound that's timeless, but it's also a sound that's kind of needed, man. Like, it's so nice to just go and just have a concert experience be uplifting and just one that you enjoy from A to Z.
Yeah. It's an interesting, and it's funny. Someone else asked me I kind of checked in obviously on what you're up to, and that's how I described it. He's doing sort of a hard bop soul jazz showcase, if you will, right? In a way.
Kind of, yeah. Showcase. I actually prefer the term review, but I'm not gonna,
review. Yeah.
And the reason I say review is because it's just running through a bunch of those things, and it's not, I guess, when you say hard bop, I guess that's right, but it's like some of those terms that we use, it automatically gives you a point of view of what you think it is,
Right.
And if I say hard bop, man, that's like, okay, that's Horace Silver.
Blakey,
that's that's just. And do we do a Horace Silver too? Yeah, I think we do have one or two in there in the book, but at the same time, we do a Spiral Gyro song.
Okay. Right.
Is that hard bop?
No.
I'm just saying. So it's really a review, a soul jazz review, because even growing up, in the beginning of smooth jazz, a lot of that stuff, it's like funny, in Europe they were labeling it acid jazz,
Right. Mm-hmm.
And when you listen to it, the spectrum of what they were calling was kind of smooth into like a little more adventuresome version of those things.
Right.
And so that's what this is. It's all of those things. And ultimately it boils down to the very best musicians playing great music, and enjoying it thoroughly. And that becomes infectious, and hopefully everyone in the room has the same kind of experience,
Yeah, I think the point that I was trying to make, of course, these subcategorizing jazz is a difficult thing. It's really more not about what musicians call it as so much as what maybe critics.
No, I understand, and I understand the need for it, and a lot of musicians historically, including myself, always, argue about labels, and in some cases those labels are actually pretty accurate. It's like Miles Davis didn't want to be called jazz, in the 1960s, and it's like
kind of jazz.
And I understand where it was coming from. You're looking at the origins of the name and racial connotations, all these things. But the average person, man, they are not going through that. They're like, that's jazz.
Yeah, right.
It's what it is, So I get that, and I'm while I want to be, refined, explained down to exactly what it is, I know that's not going to happen. Right. So it is what it is.
Right. But I do notice, like, some of the materials that you're choosing in that era, or it's a wide era, but my students who are not jazz, so Monmouth is not a jazz program, it's general music kind of program, but teaching jazz history to, music business people perhaps, or whatever, they seem to connect when I get to that era of music, the soul jazz, if you will. There's an instant connection, and often people ask me what album. I'm not really a jazz fan, what album, but I'm interested. What should I check out? And I generally try to point them in that direction, because I think it's a great doorway into the history of the music. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I can remember when the iPod came out, and my son wanted an iPod. And so when I bought the iPod, I went to load some music. He's like, Dad, no. I said, no. I bought it. I'm gonna load what I want in this thing. And I said, you can put what you want on there, but I'm gonna load some things on there. And of course, I loaded on a variety of jazz things. And it amazed me that that he would occasionally say, hey, Dad, I really like that Dolphin song. I'm like, Dolphin song? It was like Dolphin Dance.
Right.
And he had little songs that he would actually listen to and he liked. Now, cut, years later, What does he listen to? He kind of likes, soul jazz when and if he listens to jazz, but it is in his rotation of thing. And if you get in his car, he usually has like some kind of like nice little jazz thing on there, and it's like I remember that it was a gateway for me as well, more so to smooth jazz. It was a gateway for me because I would hear these things and I would like, man, I want to hear more. I want to hear more exploratory from the saxophone soloist or whomever. And one thing led me from another. And even though in my household, my mother was playing a variety of music, like she was into, like Ornette Coleman, Coltrane, and Art Blakey, all of this stuff. And so, my friends were like, man, have you heard this Art Blakey record? And I was like, no, who's Art Blakey? And they was like, he's this drummer, man. Let's check it out. And I'd go, oh, I know that record. My mom plays that record all the time, They're like, you know that? I was like, yeah. And so I had this as a background. And she also, for instance, we don't play this song, but Moanin', Bobby Timmons. That was kind of like the beginning of that soul jazz kind of feeling, those kinds of tunes that's right there in that vernacular. And it just keeps evolving, and the instruments become a little different, the musicians become a little different, they have a wider spectrum of influences, but that's a common thread and connection in the people that are in the band.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's and of course the band is phenomenal. I doubt he even remembers, but Jeremy was he lived next door to me in college, Jeremy Pelt. So.
You went to Berkeley?
Yeah. And we back then we did some sessions, but it was so long ago, But it's funny because I remember hearing, he was impressive even then, and hearing the music coming from his dorm room, and it was that, it was the more the soul jazz stuff, and we talk about it a little bit then. So you mentioned your earliest your parents. Can you talk a little bit about your upbringing? I think you were born in Kentucky and then moved.
Yeah, my parents divorced when I was around 3 years old, so I grew up primarily with my mother. I would spend the summers with my dad. But my mother was a jazz fan just by chance, and that was the music played in the house the majority of the time. There was also, soul and R&B, but I would say probably 70% jazz, 30% other. And so that's what I grew up listening to. And I remember Les McCann and Eddie Harris. And I remember there's the record Compared to What, and he cursing that record. I hate the love of that stinking mutt. And I would say these things, and I'd be a little scared. My mom would hear me say, God damn it, but I said, it's in the song. I said, and so, I remember all of those things. And in fact, recently, I went back to California to visit my mother. And, she's transitioning in her life. And so I was looking at a record collection, and I was like, wow, I can't believe she was hip enough to have some of the records that she had, It's so great, and I'm really appreciative of having that background. My dad, he didn't listen to any music. Whatever was on the AM radio, was pretty much it. And, and I would practice in his garage when I would spend the summers there. And when I was at home, I became kind of a practiceaholic, really OD'd on practicing. I would get up early in the morning before school, go in the garage, and we live in California like New Jersey, everybody's got a garage. I practice in the garage early in the morning, and then go to school, and then the lunchtime and free periods, I would just really go crazy listening to this music and practicing this music, wanting to be a musician. At that time, I had no idea what it would mean, or I'd never thought of it as a profession or something you can do as a profession. And, really, when I first signed up for band, I signed up for advanced band, not beginning band. And, you know, it's good for kids to have confidence, but I was just completely cocky. And I was like, well, I'm in the gifted program, and it'd be a waste of time for me to go into the beginning band, and surely in a few weeks I'll have this whole thing mastered. You know, great. So I signed up for advanced band, and in California they had the full spectrum of instruments, so whatever you wanted to play you can sign out and check out. So I was like, okay, watching everybody, and I took a tenor saxophone and watching put it together, assemble it. And so the band director had a piece up we were playing, and he stopped and he said, saxophones, play your part. And then, you know, then he said, you play your part. I said, what? I will in a few days. He said, no, play it now. I was like, and everybody knew I couldn't play. Bam, I was kicked out of band. And he said, not only are you kicked out of band, but you're not even allowed to enroll in beginning band unless you get private instruction. Okay. Right? So my attitude at that time was like, I'll show him. And so I got a private instructor, and I really practiced hard just to be able to say, I told you, you know, which is stupid, but, you know, the minds of a 2-year-old or however old I was, 11, 10. And, but it was a motivating factor. So my first heavy duty practice sessions was not motivated by music per se. It was motivated by me wanting to be in the band again. So sure enough, by the next year, I signed up for advanced band, and I, you know, became the first chair in that whole kind of little thing. And it was like, so it was good. So I had a sense of accomplishing something. Right. And so, and at that time, and I was listening to the music, and I was noticing the saxophone on different kinds of songs, more in different styles, you know, Gato Barbieri, Phil Woods, Cannonball Adderley, and I was Joe Henderson. You hear the saxophone, and I want to hear more and more of it. So initially, I was working at a music store, and we would hear these things on the radio, and I wanted to hear more and more. Okay. So, you know, the smooth jazz, which was prevalent at that time, and I would hear, it led me down the road to other things, you know. And it just always, some musicians have a feeling, you know, like I mentioned Bobby Timmons before. Bobby Timmons has a feeling. Herbie Hancock plays a wide spectrum of music, but he is a person that I think about has a great feeling to them. You know, it really captures you, and you can really be engrossed in his musical sphere, because he has so much feeling and dimensions to the music. And so, you know, I try to bring this to my music as well, whatever I'm doing.
Sure. Yeah. So, actually, 2 questions based on what you said. Number one, we talk about your instructor, who was brutally honest, right, with you. And I feel like those experiences, that more and more I talk to musicians, of course, everyone knows the famous Charlie Parker story with the cymbal and everything. They really help to motivate, maybe for the wrong reasons or not for musical reasons. That seems to have been now with, you know, instructors like you and I, who have to be very careful about what we say, I think, at times. Do you think that's a limiting factor, that loss of honesty?
No, I think everyone's different, and everyone takes it different ways. Right. For instance, we're certainly in a era of you know, victimization. Right. You know, you can't say anything to anybody, but, you know, I didn't raise my kids that way. You know, it's like, if you had something to say to one of them, you had no problem saying it, and get no problem. And so, yeah, I'm disheartened to see educators at every level having to walk on eggshells. And, you know, everyone does not win. Everyone does not get a trophy. Everything is not easy.
Right.
Just because you do it by the book doesn't mean that you're going to be successful. These are life lessons that we can't control. You can't control everything. And so I'm grateful for those things that happened to me. You know, later I used to study with Phil Woods.
Sure. And
Phil Woods was like, you know, people were like, man, you like him as a person? You know, I was like, yeah, he's pretty cool. And I understand why some people didn't get along with him, because he was just brutally honest.
Right.
And he's like, what? You don't know that? Oh my God, practiced it. You know, and what was interesting is that those lessons would last pretty much all day. You know, they'd be pretty much all day, and you know, brutally honest, and gave you a lot of things to think about and work on.
Sure.
So.
All right. Yeah. No, I agree. In terms of was sax your first instrument, and how did you come to choose the saxophone? Why the sax?
You know, I had an uncle that played saxophone.
Okay.
And it just looked cool. I'm just telling you, know,
Yeah.
If I had any musical knowledge whatsoever, I probably would have picked piano, you know, but, you know, you don't know. You just pick what you like. And I actually wanted to play trumpet.
Okay.
And that was my first choice. But the band director was a trumpet player, and he had some sores on his lips. And I looked at his lips, and I was like,
nope.
nah, that ain't gonna happen. So saxophone was my second choice.
Okay.
And again, like I said, I had an uncle that played it, and it just always looked cool.
Yeah.
And so that made me pick it.
It's funny. There is something about the aesthetics of the saxophone. That was my first choice. I was terrible at it. I switched. Said I better go back to bass or guitar. But I think who was I? Maybe it was Billy Harper, I believe. I was talking to him about the saxophone. He said it just had all these buttons, and it just looked like something I had to figure out. You know?
Yeah, it's like cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember my first instrument that I got, you know, new out of the store.
Sure.
Literally got new out of the store, brought it home, was playing it, and then of course I cleaned it, and then I wanted to know everything about the saxophone. So what did I do? Took it apart, and then wanted to put it back together, and of course I couldn't.
No.
Had to go to a music store
Yeah.
and to a repairman and have them reassemble it. And of course my mother was extremely mad at me, but you know, I just wanted to know everything about it. I was always into puzzles, whether it be crossword puzzles or games such as chess. You know, it's kind of a puzzle, a living puzzle. But yeah, that's always been something that's been in my personality traits.
Cool. So let's go from how you became a student to more of a professional musician. I think I read, was it a military band that you had joined at one point?
Yeah, you know, I was trying to get to New York,
Okay.
and there was a band that was one of the Army specialty bands. Was having auditions, and I made a tape, and they flew me in for an audition, and I got the part. I got the position, and then you have to join the Army. You have to go through boot camp and all those things, right. And did that, but I was way too young, you know. In fact, I believe I had to get permission to join, and you know. But it was some great musicians there, and all in all, I would have to say that it was a good experience.
Right.
Even though I didn't like it at the time, it was a good experience. It was good for me. I needed the discipline. I needed the structured organization. And so from that perspective, I think it was very good. And of course, my main motivating factor in doing that was wanting to come to New York. And while I was in the Army,
I'm sorry.
I studied clarinet with Eddie Daniels.
Oh, wow, yeah, okay, sure.
I studied saxophone at the time with Phil Woods.
Right.
And I was supposed to study flute with a guy named, whoever was the New York guy at the time. I think it was Bennett something. I can't remember. But, there was all of these amazing opportunities, and the Army would pay for it. Like, great. So, it was a great time for me. And even though I didn't take advantage of everything the Army had to offer, I did benefit greatly from the few things that I did take from it. Were very important.
Right. And then you went to a university as well?
Well, I was in university at the age of 16 at Cal State University, Chico.
Okay.
And so when I auditioned for the Army band, it was then where that I was at Chico. Just my birthday falls in November, so I was a year early.
Sure.
And so I was 16, turned 17 in November, as opposed to being 17 and turned 18. Having kids, 2 kids, both graduated out of Ivy League colleges. My son works for a fund, with his MBA, and my daughter, she's an aspiring architect.
Nice.
And having raised 2 kids, I would never allow a child to go
16.
At the age of 16 to a college,
Sure.
even if they're academically sound and mature and ready for it. I just would never do it.
Right.
So, but of course, my mom, she didn't really have perspective on that. And so that's why I went there early. And then by the time I went into the Army, I was 17, turning 18, because I left school early to do that. Mm-hmm. And then I only stayed in the Army a short time. And then I went to Long Island University in Brooklyn, where I met Pete Yellen, was my good friend. Mm-hmm. And, that was kind of like the start of, well, no, not the start, all of it was part of my musical journey.
Sure.
And here we are.
Yeah. So the first major gig, was it Lionel Hampton for you?
Yeah, I guess that's it. I was playing on the street while I was going to school. Mm-hmm. And I was actually offered Buddy Rich's gig.
Okay.
And on second alto, and the guy says to me, "Hey man, you got a credit card?" I was like, "No, why? Yeah, you're gonna need a credit card." I said, "Why?" He says, "Because if he gets mad at the lead trumpet player, he will fire the second alto player." I'm like, why would he do that? So and at the same time, they were having auditions for Lionel Hampton's big band, and I auditioned for that and got that. So I thought, maybe this is a safer bet, And so I did that, and again, it was enriching experience. I enjoyed it very much, and as I got better as a musician, more and more opportunities came my way.
Sure. Did you get to know Hampton at all, or just not that much?
Yeah, I mean, as well as you can know him.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not that well, but I was in the band for a while, and I have some great stories. I won't go into details, but I admired Lionel Hampton as a musician, and his enthusiastic love of music and performance, and he certainly gave it his all. He was a big Republican donor and fundraiser, and we used to always do these fundraising things, which at the time I didn't really think I was apolitical at the time. Mm-hmm. And we played fundraisers for Rockefeller. I played a gig in the White House. Oh my goodness.
Wow, yeah.
And I was paid $85 whole. Oh my goodness. And I had gold leaf invitations and gave it to my mom. She said, "Oh, my baby's made it. He's playing in the White House." Yeah. And so, that entails the bus meeting near Lincoln Center, near where Hamp lived, and driving down to the White House, playing a good job. Of course, Hamp stayed and we drove back. And that's when Ronald Reagan was president. And so did I get to know him? I knew him enough, like I say, he was much older than us, so there was not, so, and on the bus, the first 6 rows are Lionel Hampton's. So I remember when I first got on the bus, I sat in the first row, and the guy started laughing at me, man. You got to move back. I said, he's Hampton's there. So I moved back a row. He said, no. The first 6 rows on both sides are Lionel's. You have to move to 7 and beyond. I was like, wow, you got to be kidding me. But I had no problems with him, and it was, again, a great experience. Sometimes when we're in those things, we don't realize the value and that those experiences bring to our lives. And negative things can be also good experience. So
yeah,
I try to find positive in everything.
Sure. And then I guess there was a lot of small group stuff after that. I don't know the timeline. I'm not so familiar with, but I know.
The timeline, I'm not.
Okay.
I don't remember that perfect. After Lionel Hampton, I think the job that I got after Lionel Hampton was probably Horace Silver.
Okay.
And, I wasn't ready for that gig at all. And I wish, in some respects, I wish I didn't do it because I was premature in my development. And after that, so when Horace Silver, we toured all over and we went to Europe. And when we were in the Bern Jazz Festival, I knew Nat Adderley, and he happened to be there playing with someone.
Right.
And he told me to come up and play. And Cedar Walton was playing piano. And so, I played a few songs with Nat. And then Cedar Walton asked me for my number. I was like totally surprised. And he called me for a gig a week at the Philly Vanguard. Okay. And so I did that gig with him. And afterwards he says, you're quite promising, but not ready yet. I was like, huh?
Wow. Okay.
He said, I'll call you again one day. I'll call you again when you're ready. And he called me about 2 years later, and he called me for a gig. And then I was ready, and I played with him for 21 years.
Yeah. I mean, what a stamp of approval to have. Not only is he a great musician in his own right, but his brother's Cannonball Adderley, right?
Yeah. I worked with Nat. It's funny, when I first, I was playing on the street in New York, and the bass player, Walter Booker, heard me playing on the street with Nat, playing on the street with my band, and he said, hey, man, do you know any Cannonball Adderley music? You kind of sound like him. I said, I know all those tunes. I used to play those all the time when I was growing up. He said, well, you're still growing up. I was like, okay, good point. But
yeah.
So he said, I want you to come sit in with Nat. First I came over to his house and played. Right. He wanted me to play so Nat could hear me over the phone or something. So then I went to sit in, and I sat in with him. And Nat, at that time, he didn't really have a band. Cannon had died, a decade earlier, and he didn't have a band. He had a group of musicians that he would call anytime he had a gig.
Sure.
So he wasn't out doing tours and stuff. And he said to me, he ended up calling me to do a job. And so I was pestering, man, we should do some tours and everything and all of this. And, he was really very much a close friend for me. And his wife, Ann Adderley, she said to me, thank you so much for getting him out of his funk. You made him really have a desire to play again. And, at the time, I didn't realize, how powerful that stuff was. Of course, now as you're older, you certainly appreciate it. But at the time, I couldn't appreciate the weight of what that really meant. But sure, and so we talked all the time. And so I got the gig with Art Blakey in the Jazz Messengers. And so I called Nat to tell him, and it's so great. And we're going to Europe in January. And he's like, no, you're not. I said, yes, we are. We just did. He said, no, you're not. I said, yeah, Art just said. And he said, no, we going to Australia. I was like, oh, and then, man, I got to make a pick.
Yeah, I was going to
right?
say, it's a big decision.
You make a decision. And what happened was Art made Frank Lacey the music director.
Okay.
Frank Lacey is a trombone player, and obviously I'm cool with him now, but at the time I really didn't like him, and that was the deciding factor for me, was Art made him music director. I said, you know what? I'm going to go with Nat. So, I mean, and if I had to do it all over, I'd probably still make that same decision, just because Nat meant so much more to me than just a gig. He was a super close friend and advisor in life beyond music. And so I probably would make the same decision again.
Right. And I think, what'd you do, like almost a dozen albums with him, I think, over there?
A lot. I don't know how many, but it was a lot.
That's cool. And then another artist you worked with that I wanted to mention or ask you about was Freddie Hubbard. Can you describe that experience?
Yeah. I was always a great admirer of Freddie. I believe that was the first major artist I heard in a concert that I went to the club and heard. I think it was Freddie Hubbard. I was actually going to hear Joe Henderson because he was playing in the band, but Freddie was just so spoke to me the way he played, and I just always admired him. Occasionally, when he would come to New York, I would occasionally sit in and just got to know him, a little bit, and so. One thing led to another. I wasn't in his band because I was with Nat.
Okay.
But I would occasionally play with him.
Mm-hmm.
I remember doing a concert down Pennsylvania Friends of Jazz with Freddie Hubbard, Kenny Barron, Ben Riley, and Cecil McBee, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that was a great concert. And I just have all these memories, and then I did a few records with him, but I was never a part of his band, even though he would fire his band all the time.
Yeah. What was he like as a person, Freddie Hubbard?
It's funny. I've heard so many stories about Freddie.
Mm-hmm.
Freddie would call me in the middle of the night all the time. When I say all the time, I'm talking 5 to 10 times a month.
Wow, that's all the time.
And all the time. And he would be playing piano, and the phone would ring like, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I bet that's Hub. Sure enough, and he's playing piano. I said, what that? He said, oh, that's a new song I'm writing. And he said, what's going on in New York? And I was like, same shit. Now, who can play up there? I said, well, last week I told you, blah, blah, blah. You just... And I always had great conversations with him, and then those conversations would turn into like when he was fresh in New York and how he did this, did that, and he shared some amazing stories with me, and I just really admired him so much as a musician. So, I wish I did more with him, but his facilities on the instrument started to go down right as I started having a chance to play with him a little bit.
Right.
So it was unfortunate.
All right. Yeah. And then of course I know there's a whole bunch of solo albums. A lot of your stuff now is being released through Smoke or in conjunction with Smoke?
Well, Smoke has a label. Literally. I mean, Smoke has a really nice label and some great catalog. Mm-hmm. So I'm happy to be a part of that, yes.
Okay, yeah, because I was trying to, are all the albums like available like on a Spotify or I
don't know. I assume they are.
Okay.
But I really don't know.
Yeah, I was trying to dig into some of them. I could find some. They're great.
If you call Smoke or send somebody a text, they'll get whatever to you.
Great, cool. And then of course teaching's been a big part of your life as well. How'd you make that transition?
Well, let's see. I got a call from Mulgrew Miller, and he said, hey, man, why don't you come out here and teach at William Patterson?
Right.
I was like, man, I'm not teaching. He said, why not? I was like, man, I want them kids, man,
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I just want you to do it and check it out for a year. I was like, I'll do it for a year just to help you. So stupid, man. And so I did it, and you know, there's something about having a regular 9 to 5. But of course, we don't go 9 to 5. But
right.
Something nice about having a regular job, even if it's just as an adjunct. And then years later, I get a call to teach at Manhattan School of Music, and I've been on staff there for a number of years. And so I really enjoy teaching. And, once you start teaching, you end up being able to explain and organize things in a way that you can share information easier and quicker and with more clarity. So teaching has been good also. It's been good for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. If I hit the lottery tomorrow, would I still teach? Yeah, I'd still teach because I enjoy it, So it's not just financial rewarding. It's also spiritually rewarding, and it keeps me in touch with young musicians as well.
Sure, okay. And then just in terms of jazz moving forward, what do you think the future is for jazz?
Well, of course, nobody knows,
sure.
And we can all profess to know, and certainly there are certain indicators. One thing is like the major innovations that have taken place in jazz have been in meter, compound meter. Guys, being able to have a feeling in these multiple meters,
sure.
And really able to be aggressive in the time. I'm able to be aggressive in 4/4, rush on purpose, drag on purpose, play across the bar lines, and feel totally in command of that no matter what's going on. Man, I had a student bring some of his music in, original music for me, and I was like, what? Are you kidding me? I was like, are you kidding? I can't find this, man. And then even forcing myself to play on it, I didn't feel comfortable because as you're playing your lines that didn't line up, it's something that you have to work on.
Right.
And it's interesting if you look at the history of classical music, a lot of the innovations in jazz, of course, jazz is much younger, but same kind of thing. Like you have this when the romantic period comes, and we have that romantic period and the modal period, and the bebop period and the Bach fugues, and you have all of these parallels, and so now it's kind of like new music. I remember a friend of mine calls me to do a memorial concert for Milton Babbitt.
Oh, wow. Yeah. 20th century composer, sure.
And so a friend of me says, hey, man, I called you because I don't want just to get the regular classical guys to do this. Let's get some cats to do it. I was like, okay. And he's like, paid well, right? And he sends me the music, and I look at it, and it looks fairly easy, So, and he said, okay, who'd you get? And I told him I got to send the music to them in advance and everything. And so next thing I know, one by one, guys were calling me up, hey, man, I'm not going to make that. I said, oh, okay, no problem, we'll get somebody. And they kept canceling. All of them. I said, man, let me look at this music again. And I put the tape on, and even though it wasn't notey, and it looked simple, I couldn't follow it. And I'm a fairly good reader.
Right.
And it's like, I could not follow the music. I was like, Jesus Christ, man. I couldn't believe it. So I called up the council. He's like, come on, man, you kidding me? I'm like, man, are you kidding me? So so I ended up canceling, and they got a guy, Vincent Herring, I believe, was a guy that does all the classical saxophone stuff with the Philharmonic whenever it comes up. And that's what they did for my part. The only guy that I called that did the gig was Bob Mincer on bass clarinet.
Oh, well, okay.
Everybody else canceled for whatever reason. So we're in that period of jazz, also a lot of new music, not exclusively, obviously, but
Sure.
but it is prevalent, and especially at Manhattan School of Music.
Mm-hmm.
I also get a lot of students that are mainstream, extremely good in mainstream, but kind of new music is also on their minds, the front of their brains, kind of thing.
Sure. Cool. Very cool. It was a pleasure talking to you. Nice meeting you.
All right, you too. Okay.
All right, I appreciate you. Thanks so much.
No problem. Take care.
Take care. All right, so there you go. That was my interview with Vincent Herring. Really nice conversation, really nice guy. And, I'm very thankful he took the time. So for all things Vincent Herring, go to vincentherring.com and also check him out once again at Smoke Jazz Club in Manhattan from June 15th through June 18th with his fantastic group, the Something Else Band. If you're interested in learning more about this podcast or about future shows or past shows, go to 30albumsfor30years.com. You can check out everything related to the show. And, hang in there. I have some more content on the way, and then season 2 to follow. Together, let's keep this music alive. I hope you have a wonderful day.